News outlets and the internet have been abuzz for over a week about the latest Prince Harry and Meghan Markle incident that occurred on May 16th in New York City.
We do want to begin tonight with a stunning allegation by Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's spokesperson that they were involved in a near catastrophic car chase at the hands of a ring of highly aggressive paparazzi, allegedly involving half a dozen blacked-out vehicles. The news that Harry and Meghan were relentlessly pursued in a chase that resulted in multiple near collisions brought back memories of the fatal car crash of Harry's mother, Princess Diana, in the summer of 1997.
The couple's spokesperson called this a quote-unquote near catastrophic chase, but as it turns out, that's not the way it went down, at least not according to just about everybody else that was actually there that night. In this video, we are diving into the court of public opinion because there is quite a bit of overlap between that and the success or failure of an argument in the court of law. We're going to look at the case of Harry and Meghan and how it might relate to other cases that have played out in public, and most importantly, to try to understand how we make up our minds about these kinds of conflicts that unfold publicly and why the public reacts the way that it does. We're digging into data on human nature, exploring concepts of trust, deceit, and vengeance. It's a little bit of a different video than what I've done in the past, but I'm sharing with you a fascination with a particular topic that I've had for about as long as I can remember. And that's the question of why do we do what we do? So I am pretty excited to nerd out in this video. Let's get into it. Okay, so let's start with what actually happened here. What we first learned about this incident was that it was being called a near catastrophic car chase that spanned 2 hours of paparazzi pursuit of Harry and Meghan through the streets of New York City. Of course, given the fact that this involves Prince Harry and we are talking about paparazzi in cars through a major metropolitan city, it's natural that the very first thing that someone is going to be thinking of is Princess Diana and how she died in a car accident being pursued by the paparazzi in Paris in 1997.
In their Netflix docuseries, they spoke about being hounded by the paparazzi. Harry recalls losing his own mother, Princess Diana, who died in a fatal collision back in 1997 after the car she was being driven in tried to outrun the paparazzi in Paris.
But I knew that I had to do everything I could to protect my family. You know, I didn't want history to repeat itself.
Now, something that people don't often bring up when talking about this topic is the fact that Diana's death also had two major factors causing her death outside of the paparazzi. First, there was the fact that she wasn't wearing a seatbelt, and second, there was the fact that the driver was apparently intoxicated. But regardless, this is something that is very hard to forget. The paparazzi was relentless in pursuing Princess Diana during her lifetime, and they did play a role in the events that unfolded that fateful night. And this is something that Harry has clearly neither forgotten nor forgiven.
But you cannot disagree with Harry on the behavior of the paparazzi who took photographs of Princess Diana as she lay dying. Harry lost his mother when he was 12.
I saw the photographs of the reflection of all the paparazzi in the window at the same time.
Taking pictures of your mother as she's dying rather than helping her.
Exactly, and that, you know, that still hurts. But, you know, you can see that I saw the back of her blonde hair, you know, slumped on the back of the seat.
So when he's said that he's afraid of history repeating itself, anyone with any small amount of empathy is going to understand that this comes from a very real and tragic place. And particularly, he's talked quite a bit about how he always fears that history might repeat itself with Meghan becoming the new Diana, so to speak. And so when we hear a phrase coming from Harry and Meghan's team, like near catastrophic car chase or near catastrophic chase, it's natural for anyone to think back to a time when a catastrophic event actually did happen involving the paparazzi, involving a car chase, and think, oh God, is this all happening all over again? This was echoed by New York City Mayor Adams's comments when he lambasted the press for their pursuit of Harry and Meghan over this incident.
I don't think there's many of us who don't recall how his mom died, and it would be horrific to lose an innocent bystander during a chase like this.
But the problem is, the New York Police Department that was actually escorting the Sussexes during this incident gave a very different picture of what happened. People magazine said that the next day, the NYPD released a statement to them saying, on Tuesday evening, May 16th, the NYPD assisted the private security team protecting the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. There were numerous photographers that made their transport challenging. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex arrived at their destination, and there were no reported collisions, summonses, injuries, or arrests in regard. So, okay. The trip was challenging, according to the NYPD. Arguably, if you've ever had the experience of driving through New York City at basically any hour, I think that you could say that paparazzi or not, challenging is a pretty good way of describing getting from A to B in that city regardless. But challenging does not mean negligent or reckless or near catastrophic. There is quite a gap to bridge there between these different concepts. And when news outlets interviewed the cab driver who navigated these challenges, he also gave a much more tame account of what happened.
They were following us the whole time. There was nothing reckless or anything like that, but they were following us.
And I'm so sorry to interrupt in this moment, but I have to thank this video's sponsor. This video is sponsored by Blinkist. Blinkist is an app that allows you to understand the most important points from over 5,500 nonfiction books and podcasts in just 15 minutes. I've already said before that even before I ever had a sponsorship with Blinkist, I was already a user of their app. And my favorite part about it is the fact that you can get the core gist of just about any educational book out there if you otherwise don't have time to read it in full. Blinkist allows you to digest these points either by reading or by listening, so you can also learn while you multitask. And funny enough, it actually helped me research for this video in particular. I was reviewing the work of Malcolm Gladwell, and I came across this 10-minute podcast bit where he was talking about trust in strangers. In it, he makes such a great point that in order for society to function the way it does, we need to have some amount of trust that we by default accept.
Now, society, and I always give the example of you can't put your child on a school bus in the morning unless you have implicit trust in the system.
Anyway, Blinkist now also has a new feature called Blinkist Connect. This feature allows every Blinkist premium plan to be shared by 2 different accounts at no additional cost. So you can share the titles that you're reading with your best friend, significant other, or whomever. That is, preferably with someone who can actually appreciate it. Indy, for example. Nah, not her. And viewers of this video can get 25% off Blinkist Premium and get 2 memberships for the price of 1. So start your 7-day free trial by clicking on the link in the description below. And thanks again to Blinkist for sponsoring this video. Okay, let's get back into the video. So looking at this objectively, it seems that calling this a near catastrophic chase is at best misleading. And at worst, it seems to invoke a truly tragic event where there really doesn't seem to be much of any comparison between the two at all, which is a possibility that does not result in a very pleasant feeling. And I don't know about you, but I was struck by what seems like a stronger response to this revelation than what I've seen to previous brushes that Harry and Meghan have had with the press and with other accounts by other individuals. Already, it seemed that the American public opinion of Harry and Meghan has been shifting over time as more and more misperceptions, that we can maybe euphemistically call them, have been bubbling to the surface. According to a Newsweek article published in April of this year, all of the members of the royal family, but especially Harry and Meghan, saw a drop in their approval ratings in comparison to December of last year. This was after Harry's memoir Spare was released, as well as their joint Netflix docuseries Harry and Meghan. Now, a number of caveats should be noted with regard to this poll. First, the poll involved like 1,500 participants, which is a very small sample size. And there are some indications that although the approval ratings had dropped since December, they had also somewhat warmed in comparison to more recent months. Regardless, the point is attitudes towards Harry and Meghan do seem to be shifting over time and not in a good direction. But now, after the reporting on this latest incident, a TMZ poll shows a whopping 74% of people do not believe Harry and Meghan's version of these latest events. And that poll involved, at the time of filming this video, just around 100,000 participants. And And that leads to a question. Why does it feel like this singular event is generating this much of a visceral reaction from the public? I think it has to do with human nature and the fact that humans have a tendency to start out by believing someone, but when we become convinced of someone's deceit, we can be pretty brutal in punishing someone for their deception. Let me get into the weeds a little bit so I can explain what I mean. So there's this theory in psychology called the truth default theory. I first came across it in Malcolm Gladwell's most recent book, Talking to Strangers. In it, he talks about renowned psychologist Tim Levine, who spent his career studying deception and the ability to pick it out. And Levine says that the truth default theory essentially says that we default to thinking that someone is telling us the truth. Levine has run all kinds of studies where he has people trying to pick out where someone is lying versus where they're being honest. And as it turns out, people are no better than chance at detecting lies. But interestingly, they're way better than chance at picking out truth tellers. And the reason for this is that people in the study detecting lies versus truths, they have a tendency to think more of the people that they were observing are telling the truth than telling lies. And it apparently doesn't matter how intelligent or wise someone is, anyone and everyone is capable of being deceived. In Gladwell's book, he goes through a number of different case studies, including Bernie Madoff and his Wall Street Ponzi scheme. He also goes through the story of former Defense Intelligence Agency employee Ana Montes, who was arrested days after 9/11 for being a longtime spy for the Cuban government. You can even look around to more recent cases like Anna Delvey and Elizabeth Holmes and others. These stories involved very savvy, intelligent people who were deceived in very big ways. And what Tim Levine says is that when somebody presents a narrative to us, all other things being equal, we generally assume that they're being honest. It's only when red flags appear that we start to think otherwise. And it's not enough that there are red flags, by the way. There have to be enough red flags to overcome our natural presumption that someone is being honest. To put a finer point on it, Gladwell says that Levine's point is that we believe someone not because we have no doubts about them. And that's because belief isn't the absence of doubt. Rather, he says, we believe someone because we don't have enough doubt about them. Which, it's kind of alarming to think about this tendency, right? Because it seems like a huge vulnerability, right? I mean, if it's true, it's too easy for a bad actor to come in and take advantage of someone because their default is to assume that you're being truthful. But according to Gladwell in a recent podcast, this is kind of necessary for society to be able to function.
If you're on Wall Street, when I was talking in the book about the Madoff case, trying to account for the fact that very seasoned Wall Street people were fooled by Madoff, part of the reason is you can't be a financial trader or an investor unless you have a huge amount of trust in the system. I mean, for goodness sake, people are wiring millions of dollars. It vanishes into the ether and you trust it's going where you want it to go and being invested according to the instructions you gave. So that's the mindset that weirdly, we don't think of this. The mindset and proclivity that gets rewarded in a place like Wall Street is the propensity to trust.
And yeah, this makes a lot of sense. But regardless of how useful this is, it still leaves open this fairly large vulnerability in people. In order for society to have flourished like it has, there has to be some way of keeping a hypothetical bad actor in check. And there's an answer to that conundrum that relates to Harry and Meghan. But let's first look at how the truth default theory has played out in the court of law. Thinking back to a year ago, the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard defamation trial, this case caught the world by storm. And a big part of that was because people en masse felt like they had been believing a story for years that simply turned out to not be true. In May 2016, Amber Heard shocked the world when she filed for a temporary restraining order against Johnny Depp around the same time that they divorced. She then basically went on a campaign to become a domestic violence advocate and published the now infamous Washington Post op-ed accusing Depp of domestic abuse through implication. But after Depp sued Heard over the article and the case proceeded to trial, facts spilled out into the public that painted a very different picture of what happened in their relationship. And if you were glued to the trial like many of us were, like I was, the conversations you were having with other people who were also watching the trial probably weren't so much at what point did you start believing Johnny Depp, It was more along the lines of, at what point did you stop believing Amber Heard? For some, it was the Milani makeup compact issue. Heard's lawyer, Elaine Bredehoft, overplayed her hand in opening statements when she claimed that Heard had used a certain Milani makeup compact back in 2016 to cover up her bruises that she alleges Depp had given her.
Now, you also heard them say that all kinds of people saw Amber that week, and she didn't have any bruises on her face. Well, let me show you this. This is what Amber carried in her purse for the entire relationship with Johnny Depp. She's an actor. Do you honestly think she would have left her apartment ever without makeup? Do you think that she ever would have wanted other people to see her bruises and her cuts? This was what she used. She became very adept at it. You're going to hear the testimony from Amber about how she had to mix the different colors for the different days of the bruises as they developed in the different coloring, and how she would use these to touch those up to be able to cover those.
But Milani almost immediately published a TikTok demonstrating that that was impossible because that product did not exist until 2017. Now, for others, the point at which they were convinced by Heard's deception was when they learned about Heard's appearance on the James Corden show in 2016. Heard had claimed that the night before this appearance, Depp broke her nose and gave her 2 black eyes and a busted lip. And yet, there she was on the James Corden show telling an animated story where she was crinkling her nose and squishing her face, seemingly without any pain or discomfort that one would think would accompany those kinds of injuries. Still others said that it was the audio recordings where she herself admitted that she had physically abused Johnny.
You can please tell people that it was a fair fight and see what the jury and judge think. Tell the world, Johnny. Tell them, Johnny Depp. Johnny Depp, man, I'm a victim too of domestic violence, and yes. I know it's a fair fight. And see how many people believe or side with you.
It doesn't matter if it's a fair fight. My ass.
Exactly, because you're.
Yeah.
Mr. Depp, when did you have the conversation reflected in this report?
Y'all were holding out on me on these audios.
I told you. But regardless of which moment it was, once someone had reached the threshold where they were convinced that Amber Heard had deceived them and the public, it seemed that there was really no going back. And largely that's because of how long it took for so many people to get to that place in the first place. And looking at this through the lens of the truth default theory, this makes a lot of sense. Someone comes out with an allegation to the world, and they present that allegation with a basically sufficient level of believability, and the public will default to believing that allegation. Yes, there are those who will read a headline and instead of immediately believing or making some kind of a conclusion, they'll ask questions. But I think more often than not, those people are in that practice because they have been trained or have learned at some point to think critically about those headlines. This is arguably not a natural default setting for the vast majority of people. But either way, when someone does make an allegation such as this, over time, red flags may start to appear. And at some point, there might be enough red flags to overcome that truth default setting. At that point, everything can come crumbling down. Because while humans are very naturally trusting as a default, the thing that disincentivizes potential bad actors is the threat of punishment for their deception. Because as it turns out, this human naivete that we can call it is actually counterbalanced by the fact that we can be brutal punishers when that default trust has been violated. But this sense of vengeance or justice, depending on your perspective sometimes, where does it come from? How deep is the human desire for it? According to behavioral economist Dan Ariely's book, The Upside of Irrationality, a group of Swiss researchers led by behavioral economist and neuroeconomist Ernst Fehr ran a study to understand exactly that. The study involved sending a small amount of money to a nameless, faceless stranger, namely your partner in the study. If you trust the stranger, the deal is you send them $10 and they end up with $50. Before you send the money, everyone involved in the study is aware that they will have an option to do one of two things. They can either keep the full $50 or they can send back half of that back to you. In that second scenario, everyone wins. You end up ahead of the position in which you started. But in that first one, the other person wins even more so, and you've just lost $10. So when sending the money, of course, you are hoping that they are going to be choosing that second option. And one of the conclusions of the study is that people actually are more trusting than what we might think is logical. Many people end up passing $10 to the other person, and their anonymous partners often end up sending $25 back. This, in essence, is truth default theory in action, and it also highlights the benefits of defaulting to truth. Like I said, everyone wins in that scenario. But an interesting thing happens when the other person doesn't reciprocate by sending back half of their money. We'll call that person the deceiving partner. In the study, the person who has been wronged has an option when it turns out their partner is a deceiving partner. When that happens, the wronged partner can choose to give their own money to the experimenter. And for each dollar that the wronged partner gives to the experimenter, $2 will be extracted from the deceiving partner. So if you're the wronged partner, this punishment involves sacrificing some of your own money, but it involves sacrificing the greedy bastard's money twice as much. Let's pause for a second and let that sink in and envision yourself as the wronged party. How does this prospect, sacrificing a little bit of your money to sacrifice a lot more of your new enemy's money, how does that make you feel? It's kind of a delicious concept, isn't it? Well, as it turns out, that feeling is not unique. In fact, it's backed up by what FAIR's team found from analyzing the PET scans that were taken of these participants during the study. Specifically, what they found was increased activity in the brain striatum, which is the part of the brain that is associated with the way we experience reward. According to the PET scans, when a wronged party was deciding to punish the deceiving party, it looked like it felt really good to punish the deceiving party. And those that had a higher activation of this part of the brain were actually punishing the deceiving party to a greater degree. So it seems that there is a lot of correlation between the reward center of the brain and punishing someone for their deception. And again, looking back at how the internet has responded to Depp v. Heard and particularly focused on its hatred of Amber Heard, this makes a lot of sense. It's as if the public recognized that Amber Heard had lied to it in such a horrible way. And by the way, along the way had hijacked what was for many people a very meaningful social movement. I, of course, am talking about the Me Too movement, which was responsible for taking down, as an example, Harvey Weinstein after decades of abusing so many women. And it's as if the public was punishing Heard as a release to alleviate the turmoil of this detected deception. Punishing her through internet memes and other forms of mockery and social shaming wasn't just a logical conclusion as to what was right and wrong. It also felt good. And that's where I get back to Harry and Meghan, because I've been watching this saga unfold for a while now, as I'm sure many people have. And to me anyway, this is feeling a little bit similar in that when I saw the royal wedding years ago, I remember thinking, how beautiful, this looks like, I don't know, like a modern day actual real life fairy tale. Then over time, stories started coming out over alleged slights over status and race and other matters. And because I'm not British and I love our American system and probably always will, the royal family is really, to me, mostly just an interesting curiosity. I don't have any kind of an emotional investment as to who is right or wrong in these various instances and incidents that have come up over time. But nevertheless, there has been a narrative that has been sold to the public that Meghan Markle is the new Princess Diana. It's this idea that she's being treated maliciously by the royal family in the same way that many people say that Princess Diana was back in her day, and that the press is trying to eat Meghan Markle alive in the same way that some say that the press did to Princess Diana. Now, my honest opinion is that there may be some kernel of truth to these allegations. From my experience as a litigator, it is very hard to come across any controversy that you can conclude is entirely black and white. But over time, red flags have started to appear. Meghan claims that her children are being denied royal titles and otherwise singled out because of the way that the royal family apparently hates her.
They didn't want him to be a prince or a princess, not knowing what the gender would be, which would be different from protocol, and that he wasn't going to receive security.
What?
It was really hard.
And then it turns out that that's just the way that British titles work under British succession law. Meghan says that someone in the royal family had concerns about the skin color of her and Harry's baby, suggesting very heavily that those concerns come from racism within the royal family.
Hold up.
There are several conversations.
There's a conversation with you,
with Harry,
about how dark your baby is going to be?
Potentially, and what that would mean or look like.
Ooh.
Only for Prince Harry, in a much later interview, to very awkwardly and abruptly say that, nope, no one said anything about any racism. Meghan didn't say racism. Meghan didn't use that word. What are you talking about?
In the Oprah interview, you accuse members of your family of racism. You don't even,
the British press said that.
Right.
Did Meghan ever mention that they were racist?
She said there were troubling comments about
there was concern about his skin color.
Right. Wouldn't you describe that as essentially racist?
I wouldn't, not having lived within that family.
Right.
For me, the difference is unconscious bias and racism. But if you are called out for unconscious bias, you need to make that right.
This, of course, was after Harry and Meghan had received a Human Rights Award expressly for calling out racism, and particularly, quote, structural racism within the royal household. Then there's also the part where Meghan says that she and Harry were secretly married days before the big public wedding by the Archbishop of Canterbury.
You know, 3 days before our wedding, we got married. We called the Archbishop and we just said, look, this spectacle is for the world, but we want our union between us. The vows that we have framed in our room are just the two of us in our backyard with the Archbishop of Canterbury, and that was the piece that...
Just the three of us.
Only that was denied by the Archbishop of Canterbury, who said that it would have been a, quote, serious criminal offense if he had. So when we're talking about the public's relationship with Harry and Meghan, the public is either going to accept or not accept the narrative that they are trying to put forward to the public. As a default, the public started out, I think, generally accepting that narrative. And to be clear, I'm talking about the idea that Princess Diana's history is repeating itself with Meghan Markle. This makes sense from a truth default theory perspective. This is especially because we are talking about a connection to an event that was so sensitive and tragic and had such an emotional impact on the public for decades. So when we have these growing red flags appearing in this picture, the question then becomes, is this narrative about Meghan becoming the quote-unquote new Diana authentic, or is it being manufactured to deceive the public? In other words, are there enough red flags to overcome the public's truth default about Harry and Meghan's narrative in the court of public opinion? For some, yes, there are plenty of people who have been banging on the Harry and Meghan are liars drum for years now. But for others, the threshold red flag may just be this latest incident. And here's where things can get really heartbreaking. Remember how a year ago, Amber Heard became an example of how the Me Too movement went too far? The slogan, "Believe all women," as a result of what came out of this trial, simply had to be abandoned, because here was an example of a woman who hijacked and perverted the Me Too movement for her own personal gain. In my opinion, this trial essentially marked the death of the Me Too movement after it saw a tidal wave of change, for better or for worse. And relatedly, the conversation around the death of Princess Diana is a topic that has a similar sensitivity to the Me Too movement, and likely that will continue forever. As a foundational point, William and Harry understandably both stand in a heavily protected position in that conversation because it was their mother who died when they were just young boys. But regardless of that status, there is a real risk that Harry and Meghan could face the same level of worldwide vitriol like Amber Heard has. The way it could happen is by acting in such a way that the public becomes convinced that Harry and Meghan are synthetically creating a quote-unquote Diana 2.0 scenario out of nothing. this crisis manufacturer would be hijacking and perverting the social conversations around the death of Princess Diana, something that can trigger a lot of people due to the sheer sensitivity of the topic. Which leads me back to the question at the earlier part of this video: why are people reacting so strongly to this situation? Well, I think it's because when humans naturally default to thinking that someone is being honest in a narrative that they are putting forward, people get pretty upset when they feel like they've seen enough to conclude that they have been lied to. And this is especially true when the facts are readily available to rebut the narrative, and even more so when the narrative that is being put forward starts to look like a perversion of real tragedy. So, in my opinion, this leaves Harry and Meghan in kind of a precarious place. If the quote-unquote near catastrophic chase incident gets repeated moving forward, and by that I mean if it is labeled in such a dramatic way and then it turns out that the facts don't support that label, I expect more and more people to become convinced that Harry and Meghan are liars and perverters of the memory of Princess Diana. Which just hurts my heart to say that out loud, because no one wins in that situation. And the thing is, if that does happen, like in the case of Amber Heard, it's really hard to come back from that conclusion. And I would expect to see some very fierce social punishment by the public against Harry and Meghan. But those are my thoughts. What do you think? Do you tend to believe Harry and Meghan in the various claims that they have made over the years? Has any of that changed for you over time? What do you think of this latest incident? Am I off base here in comparing the situation to the case of Amber Heard? And if so, how? Let us know in the comments down below. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this, or at least found it interesting or informative. And if you did, I would love it if you could hit the like button. It does help us with the YouTube algorithm gods. And if you want to see more content like this and you haven't done so already, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can find out when the next video is uploaded. See you in the next one.